ask. Don't be shy. You got to ask. It's the first starting point of building a relationship.
Hey everybody, this is another episode of the Get Stuff Done podcast, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Miller, the VP of People and Talent at Ashby. He's originally a Brit, but he's been based in the US since 2016. He has been working in the HR space, moving from the recruitment side over into the head of people role, whilst he has been taking senior roles at Google, where he was for a number of years. And we're going to be talking today a lot about some of the misconceptions that exist around HR. So I'm delighted to have you on the pod today, Jim. Thanks for being my guest.
Thanks, Gordon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about your role at Ashby.
So we're a people technology company, and I'm the head of people for that company. So I get to both play with our product and help user experience and the engineers and so on develop the product and be the user. I'm also the prime user of the product internally at the company. And then I get to talk externally about the product and so on. I was a customer for both of our current existing products in our portfolio as well, historically.
Okay.
So we have a talent analytics product, which is like a super powerful BI tool that is focused on talent. And then we have an applicant tracking system, which is fully integrated with automation for scheduling and CRM functionality and reporting, tons of AI and so on. So some pretty big name companies use that product, and we've got well over 1,000 customers. So it's a fascinating seat to be in at that intersection of technology and people.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that you had transitioned from client into going over that side. So I've got to ask, who approached who?
I approached them actually. The big downturn and so on. I knew I was going to be losing my previous job. There was just no point in my role existing for a company that wasn't going to grow. And I got a lot of heads up. And I think 1 week I was the fireside speaker as a customer for Ashby for the sales organization's 2023 kickoff. And then the following week I'm emailing the CEO, Benji, who's now my boss, saying, hey, you know who I am, but here's what I think I could bring to your company. And back many, many years ago, I was on the design team of Google's in-house built ATS. Like day one design on the whiteboard with a bunch of engineers. Like, what do we need to build for you? So this was kind of a full circle journey. And thankfully he said, well, I hoped you'd approach us. And we went from there, and thankfully they gave me the job.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. And I hope that many people can hear that and maybe take something away from that level of proactive approach. That's absolutely fantastic. So I want to jump into the question that I like to ask all my guests, because this is the Get Stuff Done podcast. What is your personal strategy for getting stuff done?
It's threefold. First of all, it's organization, planning and tooling. That's the first piece. I am naturally a disorganized person. So I have to make sure I use all of the tools to hand in order to get things done. The second thing is I focus certain tasks on where I have the energy to suit those tasks. I'm a morning person. So if I need something where I need a lot of concentration, a lot of focus, then I'll tend to allocate time in the mornings to do that work. And if it's something that I can be a little bit calmer about and so on, I'll potentially do those later on in the afternoon, or I'll arrange calls that give me energy later in the day. And then the final piece is delegation. And I think that's often missed, because when you're thinking about getting stuff done personally, you're like, this is the thing I have to do. Well, I'm lucky enough to lead some people in a team here, and I have led pretty big organizations. And the tasks that you can delegate give folks new skills new knowledge, new capabilities, new attributes, and so on. So delegating where you can appropriately is the third element of how I get things done, but thinking about it more as an organization rather than just a person.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about how you have been a leader of large organizations. So then sometimes you become a leader of leaders. And I'm wondering how long have you been a leader, and how easy was it to get into that delegate mentality? Because most people tend to want to, you get good at what you're doing, hence you get the ability to lead others in it. But then, of course, you've got to let go of that.
Um, so a couple of different questions there. One, how long have I been a leader? My first true leadership opportunity was pretty early on. I was a guinea pig for a pre-graduate leadership training program for a relatively well-known British grocery store. I was already working there, and someone in human resources came up with the bright idea of, instead of hiring a whole bunch of new graduates to go onto a management training program, why don't we train the people who are already at university to be managers, so that when they graduate, they join us as a manager fully ready because they've had years of experience. So during term time, you would work in the local store just as a general store worker. And then in the holidays, your vacation time, you would actually get leadership opportunities to cover the vacations of other leaders. So I spent a couple of years worth of university vacations traveling around East Anglia, doing all sorts
Okay.
of different leadership roles, from nighttime shelf filling leader to at one point redistributing the Easter egg uh, stocks around the stores in East Anglia, because Kit Kats sold better in Great Yarmouth than they did in Ipswich, but Cadbury's cream eggs sold better in Bury St Edmunds than they did in Norwich. And I got given a white van and I drove around East Anglia. But also, that was my first experience really of spreadsheets, and I had to figure out all the thing. They set me down at a computer, and I'm old enough where when I went to school, there was one computer in the whole school. So this was my first experience of that. So that's one story.
Okay.
The other piece is actually where I struggled, because what makes you successful as an individual doesn't make you successful as a leader. And you can go through these iterations of your roles. So you're a team leader, perhaps 5 people. Then you're a manager of a team of 15, and all of a sudden that gets too big. So you have to have another manager underneath you, and you're a manager of managers. You might grow your org to 50 people. Well, I went through this journey personally in about 12 months, from 30 people to 250 people in my org.
That's
And
rapid.
rapid step change through all of those sets of responsibilities. And the higher you go, the more lonely it is. And no one tells you your job has changed. You've had a fantastic career, otherwise they wouldn't have put you into this role, by doing things that have made you very successful. And now it turns out that those things just get in the way of other people. And there's a real journey to go on there, and a realization. So I'm sure we can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, even just the concept of what you mentioned about that supermarket doing that kind of program in advance. I mean, I guess as long as you access super highly motivated people who are willing to do that, then that's very good kind of pre-training. Did you stay with that organization after uni, or
I,
did you go
I, I
elsewhere?
did for about 5 months, until I realized that there was a big wide world out there, and all my friends were getting these other kinds of graduate jobs, and I went off to find something different. I ended up in
Okay.
insurance for 3 years. I'm not sure it was the right direction, but here I am today. Motivation wise, they gave me a Rover 400 as a company car for the vacations. That was pretty cool motivation for somebody who was a student. So
Yeah.
that was fun.
Yeah, that does sound like a really good kind of formative experience.
I'm also
Um,
dating myself. That's
so
a poor man's BMW 3 Series in the 90s.
okay, okay, yeah. So that will help. That will help the global audience who don't even know what a rover is. Yeah. Um, okay. So it sounds. I mean, you've absolutely had almost a full full scale of leadership roles, do you feel that you were kind of naturally inclined to leadership roles, or was it something more that was kind of put upon you and you got elected into those positions?
Yeah, in the earlier days, I think it was something that came naturally to me and people saw the potential. I actually then resisted it a lot in the middle of my career. So I
Hmm.
went from being a leader in pretty much every position I had from that graduate time until I joined Google. And then I joined Google as an individual contributor. And at that point, I made up my mind that I did not want to be a leader. And I spent 5 years
Okay.
resisting the the temptation and the push to become a leader, and finally said, "Okay, I will." And then it turns out there's actually something about the reluctant leader, the mindset, that can help them be a reasonably good leader, and it overcomes some of the more ego-driven elements as to why you wanted to do that. And perhaps they were dominant in me when I was younger, so there's some trade-off there. And I think sport
In,
plays into it as well. And you and I are connected because I played field hockey, and I actually played field hockey with your sister. And I was a field hockey goalkeeper. And although I might not necessarily have been a captain of the team, was at times not particularly successfully, but as the goalkeeper, you've got this kind of vision and you can see everything that's going on, and it's very organizational, and you're communicating to everyone on the pitch, and I have a loud voice. So I think there's some elements learned during that part of extracurricular activities that led into it as well.
the reluctant leader. Have you copyrighted this? Is
No,
this already something that's been studied? I mean,
I
it
think so,
sounds
yes.
like it's something. Okay, so okay, well, that's something that I'm going to look up because I think that's very interesting. What that you highlighted there, and sports. I mean, sports I think are undervalued, or maybe not undervalued, but maybe kind of under recognized as a really good, like you say, kind of from doing your own thing as the goalie from organizational, but also through what you get out of it. Not just the teamwork element, but even there's all kinds of different things which can help you. As an individual, as a leader, as a colleague. So it's something that I often look at in my role within recruitment. What types of organizations, particularly sporting teams and other things have people been involved in. And then if they have, as you say, like a captain role or some other kind of role within that, which they have gone for, then that can be a very good indicator, or at least something that allows you to get inside the person and really understand what makes them tick, which I think
Yes.
is another good thing to do. Um, Okay. Well, I want to and flip things around and ask about you, like your kind of drive and where this like you said, reluctant leader, but still somebody who's very much been in people oriented roles throughout your career. Where do you feel that kind of makeup has come from
I think there's an
in your
element of
background?
I think there's an element of teaching that drives. So the part of me that the people that were pushing the reluctant leader to go into leadership were seeing was that I was already the person having an impact on those around me, the adjacent influencing and teaching people the skills that were making me successful in an unselfish way. That just being an enabler and a disseminator of information and helping and so on, that got me recognised, and it also got me recognised earlier. Um, Even in my recruiting agency days, I ended up as the person teaching every new employee all of the basics of recruiting, and I'm still in touch with people that I trained in their first day in recruiting, and they're kind of the folks that they've trained. It's almost like a big family tree over time. So that's something that's naturally been part of what I do. That kind of training element, educating, teaching, facilitating, and so on. And so that was recognised, and I thoroughly enjoy that. And then that's become part of that drive as a leader just try and make everybody incrementally better in some way. So there becomes some diagnosis and analytics elements of that. If you can draw out the weaknesses in people's process or skills, knowledge, whatever it happens to be, and build on that, if you can constantly lift the bottom to the top, you get massive incremental gains. So I have a whole bunch of different business methodologies that I've developed over time where I'm trying to think a little bit like the British cycling model, where they won all the gold
Hmm.
medals over the years because they break every element of cycling down,
Right.
the science of incremental gains and so on. So I think a
Yes.
lot about
Yes.
things in that kind of style. And folks can go off and Google Dave Brailsford and the science of incremental gains and all that fun story, whether it's real or not. The British cycling wheels were always rounder than everybody else's, apparently. But that's one way I look at it. And then there's the other side of the drive, which might sound a little bit negative to start with, but it's based on anxiety. And I get very, very anxious when something is playing on my mind. It's a natural trait, it's part of who I am. So to combat that, I have to either get things done, in which case I follow the 2 minute rule. So if a task comes in, I can do with it in 2 minutes and I'll deal with it within 2 minutes. Otherwise, it will get time in my calendar. And once you set aside time to do something, it actually puts your mind at rest because you're not constantly worrying about remembering to do the thing. It's already there on a list. It's already there in your calendar. You're using the tools to your advantage. And putting that anxiety to rest has become a motivator for me so that I can then be present in the rest of my life. The things that I love doing, hobbies, my family, I have 4 kids, and so on. I can truly be present there. Because until I learnt those lessons, I wasn't, and I didn't have that drive. And that actually coincides, that learning. And I can remember distinctly when I learnt about how your brain operates in the sense of the anxiety that it's producing because you haven't got something done and you're worried about it. I remember where that was. And my career took off from that moment onwards. So
Okay.
that intrinsic driver element there has been harnessed from a negative situation.
Jim, if I may, you seem to have an incredibly high level of self awareness. You mentioned very clearly the specific things that you are aware of in order for you to get stuff done, all the things that you have to get done. Have you consciously pursued that? Is it something that over the course of your career you've been through a lot of training with your organizations, or is it something just naturally intrinsic within you? I'm really curious to know about that.
I've been through a lot of training, and I can give shout outs to the trainers and the coaches and everything else. They've really helped. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and Oscar Wilde said, "Be yourself because everybody else is taken." And from my experience in my working life, and I used to be the first speaker for every new manager coming into Google in London across all departments. I would be the person they would meet on their very first morning on the new manager flagship training program. And this was my first statement to them: be yourself. Everyone else is taken. Because if you are yourself, even only in that training session, then you will get feedback truly on who you are. And that's something you can then build off of when you get that feedback on who you're truly being. Because if you're being someone else, if you're pretending at something in life, any feedback you get, you can personally easily dismiss because it's not you. To come back to what I'm saying, I had a realization at some point that in order to get on in life, I really had to be myself rather than trying to fake it. So the real me does wear grey shirts with flamingos on. And I did turn up at the school disco in the 80s in a very, very loud, shiny silver blazer with some incredibly plastic slip-on shoes and so on. And I've kind of brought that back into my life, and it's become part of my personal brand. But I don't shy away from who I am. I'm not trying to hide anything. And because of that, when I get feedback of, "Hey, Jim, you're being really overbearing," it lands because it's me that's being overbearing. and I know I am, and I'm feeling it, and I'm now understanding how somebody else is experiencing that. So I can take on that feedback and recognize it. And it might not necessarily stop me being completely overbearing, but at least I can tone it down a little bit when I need to and start to recognize the signals that another person is going to give
Yeah.
me, and so on. So
Yeah.
that's the one thing that's had the biggest impact above and beyond the training. But it's the trainings and the coaching sessions and so on that help you realize just how important that is. The microphone thing
Okay.
is
And
just too close.
so, do you think it's important to be your authentic self, both in and out of work? Because I think in certain industries, maybe also certain country cultures, there are kind of sometimes strict rules around how people should be and act within the workspace. And so if somebody is not naturally conforming to that, is that then not the place for them because they can't be their authentic self, or is that just a conscious choice that people need to make and then therefore have slightly different roles? What do you think about that?
I think it's the latter, that you have to make your own conscientious choice. Who do I want to be? Where do I want to be that person? The other thing is, I think cultures are generally the kind of cultural quotient is morphing together as the world becomes smaller through the internet, through anything from YouTube to TikTok, of everyone being exposed to how everybody else lives their lives, and a much better understanding of that, and people being able to talk about, well, this is where I think I would fit in, this is who I think I am, and being empowered by the internet as a broad tool to truly be themselves. And I think we're seeing much more of that in society than perhaps the elements of secret societies within society, where people can be themselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Tell me about a time when you have struggled to get the stuff done that you need to get done, and how did you go about rectifying that and getting back on the right path?
That was what I touched on earlier about the extreme organization growth. I went from, as I said, leading a team of about 30 people when I was at Google in London. And then by the end of 2016, 150 or so people in my organization with multiple layers of management, two different, very distinct different organizations reporting up to me. One of which I'd taken over on a long-term interim basis, and the other one was an aggregation of multiple different geographical teams. So the whole
Okay.
concept of forming, norming, storming, performing, we were still at forming, but with two different orgs. And my natural inclination was to dive in, be very hands-on, be very deliberate in my decision making, very decisive. And you realize that you can't take everybody on that journey in that way, because you're only communicating in one style. You're not communicating through your organization effectively. You've got a big audience. They're not going to hear the same message. And you start to make mistakes, quite dramatic mistakes, that I've reflected on a lot during my career. And you get performance feedback and other feedback that comes into you, and you slowly start to piece things together. In this particular case, it was a training course that made me fully realize, and the tagline for the training course, and this was internal, was "Your job changed and no one told you." And that was that moment of, hang on a second, all the people that were giving me the feedback on what was going wrong have been through this training before me, and they didn't tell me, even though they knew that no one was telling me. So at that point, I started to think it was a conspiracy theory, but And I was doing the things that had made me successful. I was going into the weeds, right down to the bottom of my organization, but bypassing the leaders in between. And that behavior in its own right caused folks to resent it, because you weren't taking them on the journey. You weren't teaching them the skills that had made you successful. You weren't able to communicate effectively, and you weren't getting their opinion and their feedback in. So I really struggled. And like I said earlier, it's a lonely place at the top of an organization. And the higher you get, the more so it becomes. So you have to find your mentors. either in your organization, your peers, even people who report up to you, can be your mentor in helping you understand the impact that you're having. And again, it's a step change in my journey in leadership and so on, that I learned so much from that experience. But I struggled to take the organization forward and have the organization get the things done that they needed to, because of getting in my own way in trying to get things done faster.
People often struggle to find mentors. Do you have any advice for people who maybe now they realize they could benefit from having a mentor, but they don't know where to start?
Ask. Don't be shy. You got to ask. It's the first starting point of building a relationship. You don't have to ask face to face. It can be an email. It can be a LinkedIn message. I get quite a few of folks just reaching out going, hey, you do this and I aspire to this, and I'd love it if you could spare some time. And more often than not, they're within the talent space, and that's a great use of my time, because they're potential customers downstream from my, in a very selfish perspective. But I can help where I can, and I can share that knowledge. And I talked about that being one of my motivators and drivers earlier on. So I think that's the first point. If you feel that something's not going right, go and solicit help. Talk to your manager. It's not a sign of weakness. Talk to the people perhaps who report to you, the people who sit next to you, and then go further afield and look at other people who do the same job, and ask them for just one snippet of advice that might then manifest itself into a mentoring relationship. But the first rule of mentoring anyone is that the other person has to be the driver of the relationship. The mentee has to drive that. You can't coach somebody or mentor somebody who doesn't want to be there. So they have to be the proactive member in that relationship. So therefore, if you feel you need to be mentored, you've got to go out there and take that first step.
Okay. And somebody asked me recently on LinkedIn, why would someone want to be a mentor? And I guess that maybe for them there was a barrier to asking people because they couldn't see why someone would want to be a mentor. Could you maybe clarify some of the whys?
For me, again, like I said earlier, it's that driver of wanting to share knowledge. It doesn't need to be locked away here. It's not my personal property. It's been given to me by many other people. So there's an ethical step of sharing. The like part of my role is a lot of thought leadership, knowledge sharing around talent process and so on. So I naturally do a lot of that with our business aims centered in it, in spreading awareness of our company brand and so on and so forth. So there's those elements. The network itself, you reap what you sow, and if you're giving out and you're helping and you're giving something into community, when you need help, that's potentially something that's been banked for you downstream as well. So step up and have a look outside and go help, and then one day you may well need it yourself, and you'll be very thankful that you help someone who then is able to repay that in some way.
No, I fully agree with those points there. Now, you mentioned that you're heavily involved in the people process, and your entire career has been around that function within organizations, and yet somehow, despite people being for most organizations, if not all, the most important thing, and certainly the decisive factor of competitive edge. Why do we still see in 2024 HR as a broad business function still not, for many organizations, being put up there at the same level in the organization as other critical functions?
I think the first part is the economics element. Um, it's a cost center for most companies. The people function is a cost center. Naturally, we look at it slightly differently because we're a people technology company. So our people function spends a great deal of time speaking outwardly about our company, the product, and the space we work in. But I think,
Mm.
if you look at the way the mechanics work within a business, the people team is often the first team hit in any downturn by reduction in force or any other way that you want to call layoffs and redundancies and so on and so forth. When you think about it at the base level, you're saying it's a temporary function, that it doesn't have a longevity in your organization if that's your first approach. And therefore, you're not a people-centric organization because that's the first step you take. And that's been happening far too much in the last 2 or 3 years. I was impacted myself. So I think it's that in itself is manifesting the problem. The people organization is somewhat seen as disposable. And yes, it overly impacts the recruiting organizations, and it makes a lot of business sense that it's very transactional, it's focused on growth. If you're not growing, if you're reducing your costs, and that's the space. But there's a lot that you can do to mitigate that in advance. So I think that plays into it a lot. Then the other side of it, I think that in the very nature of creating the purpose for your existence as a department, you can somewhat slow a business down. You can get in the way, you can restrict innovation, momentum, and so on of an organization. So at that point, if human resources or the people operations department have become an obstacle, everybody else is spending energy working around you. And that's something that I think all people teams should just stop and take stock of every now and again of what impact are we having? These processes and so on that we're putting in place. Is there a way that we could have turned that into a different way to perhaps empower organizations or leaders to make decisions themselves, apply principles that belong to the company as a whole to move forward in a more coherent way without us putting a one-size-fits-all process in place? Those kinds of things. So I spend a lot of time trying to explore the ideas of light HR rather than
Okay.
big human resources organizations. And is there a way that we can look at this very, very differently that then mitigate some of
Hmm.
those outcomes that I just talked about?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where you started there is the absolute, when you boil it down to the cost and the ROI. So then would you advocate perhaps that people functions do a better job at being more cost aware, being a bit more financially oriented, or is that somehow going against the very nature of what the people functions trying to achieve?
I would absolutely advocate for that. I think everybody in an organization is beholden to fully understand the business fundamentals of the company they work for. And if you don't understand the economics of the business, then you won't be making the right decisions. It's a business after all. So, I'm in the SaaS, software as a service space, and there's a particular, set of SaaS business fundamentals that I'm constantly trying to operate within to make sure that I don't cause a problem with cost downstream. But it also helps you
Yeah.
focus on what the priorities are. The old adage, people are the most important resource for a company, is very, very true. And yet, a lot of the time, when in my vantage point and being able to look at the processes of other companies now, and indeed the companies that I've
Hmm.
worked for, the focus has not always been on quality of hire. It's often been on the quantity or volume, the momentum of hiring, because at some point there is a mathematical model you're trying to meet, which is this number of people doing this job equates to this revenue or this customer satisfaction or this number of new products or lines of code or whatever it happens to be. And you can get away from the true purpose, which is to hire the very best people you can afford as a company to do the work that your company needs them to do in the best possible way and be empowered to work in a very efficient, very innovative, whatever it happens to be, the drivers of your organization, rather than just putting a number of people in place and hoping that it then meets the outcomes that the data suggests it will meet. You should be looking to beat the data. A good friend of mine,
Yeah.
shout out to Toby Barnes, said to me once, he said, Jim, have you ever thought about why we have hiring targets and not headcount budgets? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, targets are there to be beaten. So all these recruitment teams keep going out to beat their headcount target and to hire people faster and more people than what you were targeted to do so that your line looks better than the curve. And I was like, and he said, but if you call it a headcount budget, everyone knows they're supposed to come in under budget. So if you hire higher quality people and you come in under budget, you'll cost the company less, but you'll have much better people to do the work. And I was like, it's brilliant. And if you hire people faster, you've got to pay them for that time that you spent. You've already hired them earlier than when you were expecting them to be in the business. So when you finish the year and you reconcile all of your books, your wage bill is far higher than you thought it would be. I was like, I've been in this game for probably 20 years when we had this conversation, and it was insightful. And I think it stemmed from a conversation he was having with his CEO or CFO or something like that. But it really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And of course, then we've gone through the hypergrowth scenarios that we have, and we've seen the outcomes of hiring targets. And it's very easy to forget that it's not about the data. It's about the outcome. And the data was just there to predict the outcome.
I think that's a very good way of looking at it. I mean, it's definitely a very refreshing way of looking at it. You know, you spurred a scenario that companies have in my world around retention, and companies will fling huge attention, resources, energy towards trying to stop this employee turnover and look at how they can keep people longer, rather than thinking maybe we didn't hire the right person in the first place and we're trying to keep the wrong people. And actually, if those people that were not the right hire in the first place leave, and then we start hiring better people in the first place, the whole thing gets better, right? But that's, I think, yeah. It's surprising how organizations can go on for so long sometimes pursuing the wrong kind of things. That's
The
also,
world moves fast. You might hire an entire team of something, and then in 5 years' time, you don't need that something anymore. But because you've always had them, all of your data indicates that they're critical to your business. It's little tiny things like that when you take a
yeah,
step back and go,
yeah,
hang on a second. And one of I like to play with process to see how we can do that. Backfill methodologies. Instead of just backfilling the same person or the same role if somebody leaves, take the headcount away and then go through the process of where would that headcount best be spent. And over a period of time, you will see entire organizations disappear without ever making a layoff or redundancy as people move out of that org with internal mobility or they leave the company, and you're deciding it's not a priority anymore to have that skill
yeah,
set in your
yeah,
business. Little
yeah,
tiny mechanical incremental changes that can really have impact.
yeah. I mean, that's a kind of best of both scenarios, right there. I was very impressed reading the book by the Netflix founder and Erin Meyer, No Rules Rules, where with their one of their talent strategies is around trying to fill the boat with only A-star players, under a belief that any low performer not only is a low performer in themselves, but has a disproportionate effect on the performance of everybody else there as well. Is this, I guess this is kind of talent density, I think is the term that's going around. Is that,
Because
is
of
that, is
current
that,
buzzword, yes. So we want to get into the mechanics of the talent piece. Historically, recruiting teams have never been given the resources to fully perform and focus on quality. So they've tried to be as efficient as possible. And that efficiency has driven them to hire the first person who passes all of the tests. But was that person the very best person in the market right now for that job? So if you flip the A star player thing, talent density, on its head, you can actually turn it into a logistical problem. And logistical problems are much easier to solve. So the focus that I like to have is on choice. How do you create the logistical elements of a talent process to move the very best applicants objectively through your process so that they all get to the end point at the same time and you have more than you need at the end point, which might sound inefficient, but if you don't actually allow anybody who is below the bar into your process because you look holistically at the whole pool, not just the elements of the stream as it comes past your eyes, then you can get to the end and you can create choice. And choice is the biggest driver of quality. Because who is to say at the very beginning of a journey for somebody who is A star and who isn't, especially if you've got no comparison point? But if you've got 4 people who are above your bar in terms of all of the tests that you've objectively given them and judged them on, and you've got those 4 people, and then you enable your organization to say, we'd happily hire any one of these people, but who do you want to hire from that group? That choice can drive quality. And you can change all of that without having to think about, well, should we ask them a different interview question? Should we have a different interview process? Any of these elements. It's not about the subject matter. It's simply about how you organized your talent pool in the first place and how you moved them through and how you got your stakeholders involved early to define what quality looked like on paper. And then at the first interview stage, and you move the group through without any stack ranking at all. Because naturally you'll get people who spike at different areas of the interview process because you're testing different skills. And that plays into that choice element at the end. Skill A, B, and C are the most important. D is our trade-off. Whereas if D was tested at the beginning of the process, you may have rejected everybody who spikes in A, B, and C, and you only are left with D. But if everybody passes D, and you don't just take the spiky D people through, then you're still able to find the ones who can spike in A, B, and C from your process and meet all of your requirements.
I think all of that is just so explicitly clear that it ends up with a better result. But companies forever will say, yeah, but we don't have time to do that. We we've got deadlines, we've got this to fill. How do you go about trying to inform, educate? I don't know the right term to get companies to realize that having a bum on a seat next Monday isn't necessarily going to be the best thing for them.
You can still do this in the same time period that you were historically hiring. You'd save time by not speaking to the people who wouldn't have got the job. You just didn't know they wouldn't have got the job because you didn't realize there were better people in the pool. If you just slow the beginning just by a day or two and then look holistically and then only move the very best candidates through, you will actually get everybody through the process far faster. Right? So there's an emotional reason why you should care about this change because of higher quality colleagues to work with and a better company. And then when you think about logically, if you define the input to a talent process with the data that you have from your historical data, you target that on how many people would I need to put into process to hire 3 folks, not 1. And then you build that pipeline and then you choose the very best, not just you as the recruiter, but the hiring manager working in partnership together. Now you're facilitating that change at the same time. And at that point, with a logical reason, an emotional reason, and the facilitation, people can really get behind change. Shameless plug, I'm actually going to have some kind of paper on this come out pretty soon. And it's also part of a hiring excellence framework training that we're going to be releasing as a company as well. So
Okay.
There's collateral behind my words coming.
Excellent. Happy to share if the timing works. Happy to share those resources as much as possible. Do you, obviously for companies that are stellar global brand recognition from the get-go, their life is easier. Do you also work with brands which are unknown in the market, who have basically essentially no employer brand, who when they go out to talents are starting from zero?
Absolutely. The way I like to play it is you have the recruiter or sourcer role, and those people go out onto LinkedIn and other places to try and find talent. And they're writing Boolean logic, they're writing lists of keywords in certain structured ways to find talent. Think about it in reverse. Since 1999, 2000, everybody's been Googling everything. People go out to find a new job. In order to find that new job, they probably don't put a brand name into their job search. They put a list of keywords into their job search. And the return on that search is a list of jobs. And they may well click on the ones that belong to brand names that they know and recognize and potentially love if they've got deep affinity with them. And they may apply to those jobs. But they'll also look at companies that they've never heard of, jobs at companies they've never heard of. And that's the moment that, one, the first part, you have done deep search engine optimization on your jobs to include the keywords that the human who would be good for that role will write into their search. And you've written a story that tells that person reading that document, that job description, about how they would fit into this role, what they would do, the impact that they would have, enabling them to see themselves in that role and see what the qualifications are, the criteria, all of that, and see what success looks like. And the thing we were talking about earlier, the Netflix book and so on, that's outcome-based hiring, which is all about what does success look like for an A-star player in 6 months' time. Well, why wouldn't you write that in the job description so that people can test themselves against it and decide whether that's still a job they want to apply for? So that's my first approach if you've got no brand, because a brand can be a damaging thing because you get tons and tons of people who would love to work for you, and then you've just got more cost. Too much pipeline in recruiting is cost. Too much pipeline in sales, that's new shiny logos. They're very different things. Never confuse the two. If you're driving a talent team, if you're watching this on producing more pipeline, it's not necessarily the right thing. You want the right candidate for the right role, not just more candidates. But that focus on telling the story. We take it to another level with our job descriptions. We actually tell people why not to apply for the job in a job description. Here are the reasons why you might not want to apply for this job. We are saving you the time in going through the application for this job you will not get. I mean, I think
I
that's
love
pretty
that.
much unheard of.
I love that. It makes so much sense, and that's what I guess the best things are always the things which are so clearly correct, but often are not previously thought of, and some real nuggets there, I think, for either HR leaders or business leaders who are facing those kind of challenges.
It even works at the
Absolutely.
executive level. You don't have to pay the executive search fees. Just try advertising the job for a week or two. You'd be amazed. These executives, they'll go off and find $1 million house to buy on Zillow. Why wouldn't they find their next job by doing a search?
Absolutely. I want to move into some of the misconceptions about HR, and maybe this is kind of looping back to where we kind of started. As to why perhaps people functions aren't right. Right there. What would be some of the misconceptions that you, as a practitioner of someone more than 20 years on this side, feels that you'd maybe like to dispel?
I think the majority of the world interacts with the human resources department in the guise of the personnel officer. And they are the first impression of a company and they're the last impression of a company. So on your first morning, you meet the personnel officer and they get you to fill out a bunch of forms and perhaps they do some training with you or onboarding or show you where the tea room is, whatever it happens to be. They perform an incredibly valuable role in most companies. But they're also the last person you see. And that's either because they're in the room if you're being fired or they're in the room doing the exit interview. And it could well be that those are the only two times you interact with that individual. And so for huge tranches of the population, this is the human resources role, and that's what people see. What they don't see is everything that goes on behind the scenes, the striving to create the incremental gains and the growth in individuals by helping them to see themselves, react to feedback in a better way, to have a fulfilling career, to be able to discover new skills, learn and grow, and so on and so forth. So I think it's beholden on people operations teams, talent teams, HR teams to tell that story as often as they can. The great showman of people operations, Laszlo Bock, who was the leader of people at Google for a decade, and he told stories about benefits that stood out that made people talk about your company. And to me, the death in service benefits, a morbid topic. But while I was there, if I'd have died, then my spouse and my children would have got X, Y, and Z benefits over multiple years. And again, it takes some anxiety out of those people's lives. But all of a sudden, you're starting to see people operations in a completely different light. And it's a very positive one. Whereas, again, a lot of people's experience is someone who's authoritarian, a rule bringer, a rule enforcer, almost like a police force type role. And I think human nature, to a certain extent, is to rebel. And if you're rebelling against an organization, you certainly don't want to go and have a conversation with them. And yet, these are supposed to be the people. So there's real friction between the various different elements of the role and the function. We have to do a better job of telling the story about the good elements and what we bring to a company, and to a certain extent downplaying the pieces that can cause fear and intimidation, for want of better words. So it's a fascinating thing that goes on, and often they're trying to operate within a culture that they've never they weren't part of creating. The founders or a company that's 200 years old has always worked this way, and so on. So people experience it in very different ways too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And similar to that, I find often there's a perception that the HR department is the kind of the holder of the rule book. The employee regulation, the employee policy, and the person or the team responsible for making sure those rules are adhered to. But I don't think that the HR that conceptually the HR is coming at it from let's keep to the rules. We want to enforce the rules. I think that moreover, it's more of an optimistic view about how we can make the organization better. That it's applied in that way. I mean, it kind of manifests itself in that way, but it's the starting point is that we can be the best um, kind of people as employees, as a group of individuals that we can, and that I think sometimes is misunderstood by people.
It is, the code of conduct is a powerful document, but I think there's another factor in there as well. It's a mitigation of risk situation. The legal side of things is very, very expensive, and so you might be wanting to make your company better and the people better, and you might not necessarily want to be enforcing the rules, but there comes this element of you're almost forced into doing things in a certain way because of the legal elements of it, and they can often be the restrictor of any innovation in the space. So if you're not in human resources, have a little bit of empathy for the people trying to navigate this stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't know the ratio of the audience who are in HR, not in HR. I know it's a pretty globally dispersed audience, but yeah, maybe we should do a little poll on that to see whether everybody who's watching this is already on board and they're cheering, or whether they're all kind of thinking this is new, this is something I've never heard before. Um, okay, are there any other misconceptions that you would like to
um,
discuss?
yeah, that we don't wear loud shirts and have fun. So some of the most fun people I've ever met in my life are the people within people operations, especially when they let their hair down a little bit. So yeah, we are humans behind the android personas. So there's that element. Uh,
Yeah,
it,
I think that's an important one.
I think the other misconception is that they're always on the company's side, and I think that's not true. They're humans first and foremost, and they want to listen and to understand and to discover what the problems are. Because even if they are on the company side through and through, the information that you're giving is likely to help the company adapt and change and grow and innovate and so on, and avoid risk and mitigate future costs and all of these kinds of things. So it's knowing that you should be welcome to have a conversation and to share your concerns, and you can quite comfortably ask how they'll be treated and how confidential they will be, and so on and so forth. And there's rules that teams have to abide by, and they'll give you that information. But when you see something, say something, just go have the conversation, or at least ask if you can have the conversation, because 9 times out of 10 they're there to help you as well.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot, and I feel there's still a lot that we haven't yet covered, but we are approaching the hour mark. So I want to maybe move into a final segment of taking a bit of a future view. And Jim, I want to get your view on maybe kind of encapsulating what we've kind of talked about today, but just also more broadly, what you see as some of the emerging and really in people trends that are coming out now, already emerging and kind of going into the future.
I think the biggest emerging people trend is the lack of people AI. It's already a hot topic, whether you're discussing the cost of electricity because it's sucking up all the power on the planet, or whether you're talking about jobs and universal minimum wage and all of these types of things. It's completely pervasive. It's ubiquitous in every conversation right now, and it directly impacts human resources, the people in the workforce. We've seen these step changes in industry over time, from the Industrial Revolution to robotics and so on. And I think this is going to be fascinating. In my own tiny little microcosm of a world, we have assistive AI that helps me do my job more efficiently, and I think is just wonderful. You might not think so, because you might not necessarily be in a job to be able to use it, and that's very disappointing and sad. But for me, that's a positive element in my day-to-day operations of the help that it's giving me. Then there's the other side of AI within talent around selective AI and the bias question, and how do these things learn, and what are they drawing on, and they're choosing humans. There's a lot of fear around that, and how is that going to manifest itself, and what's it going to look like, legal ramifications and so on. Then there's the kind of more playful piece of, well, if AI is helping the companies choose the next hires, AI is also going to be deployed by the job seekers. And I'm already seeing tools out there that will write your resume for you based on the job description you want to apply for. They'll go out and find the job descriptions for you and serve them up to you, and you tell it which one to apply for. And then they even drop transparent prompt code embedded into your resume that will talk to the LLM that's reading your resume on behalf of the job description, to tell the LLM why you're perfect for that job without it being in any of the words in your resume. If you think about how that's going to manifest itself, you might get 5,000 applications in the first hour of opening a job, and your
Right.
system, I haven't seen a tooling do it to this scale, might turn around and go, you've got 5,000 perfect applications here.
Yeah.
That then
99%
manifests
match.
itself out into a whole bunch of humans being required to figure out which ones of those you should interview. And you probably need more humans than you did before the technology was deployed. We
I
don't
love
know
it.
where this is going.
Yeah.
And, Uh, Obviously, we've all seen the movies, but you've potentially got Skynet versus Skynet rather than and the humans sitting back and eating popcorn and watching it all happen and then coming in and cleaning up the mess. Um, so yeah, it's worrying at the moment. I think everyone's waiting to see what the impact is. And that's the biggest signal that I can see at the moment. And that's the piece that's really impacting the labour markets. It's not that the jobs are being replaced yet. It's that people
Mhm.
aren't willing to invest in people to do certain jobs because they think they're going to be replaced. And so that's the unnatural balance thing at the moment, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we will be watching it. We will be living it. This space, and it remains to be seen how it will emerge. But that was a very interesting potential scenario of, in the end, needing more people. Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure covering the topics that we've chatted about today. If people want to reach out to you or get in touch, what would be the best way?
Find me on LinkedIn. I have a pretty unique LinkedIn URL. I think it's J followed by it might be 19 or 20 M's. I forget exactly how many it is, but I'm sure we can share it on the bottom of the thing.
Yeah,
There's a story behind
we
that, but
will.
I'll tell you if you want to one day. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Jim Miller, and I work at a company called Ashby, and we make talent technology like ATSs.
Fantastic. Jim, thanks so much for being the guest today. And everybody, thank you for listening and watching wherever you may be. And remember, get stuff done.
Thank you.